Oh, hello. Darryl Davis here, welcoming you again to the history of the Gosford Musical Society. Now, the last time that I spoke, I talked about the Valencia Theatre, which was the home of GMS from 1947. Actually, the first production was 48, but 47 when it was created, to 1960. And today I'm going to talk about a new venue. You see, in 1960, the Valencia Theatre basically went under. And so the society had to find a new place to go to. And they were in recess then for a couple of years while trying to find a spot. Oh, they tried places like the East Gosford Progress Hall and a Kincumber, but they couldn't find a place big enough until in 1965 they came up with a wonderful place called the Dwyer Pavilion. Now, when you think of a name like that, the Pavilion, it sort of renders up all these great ideas of these majestic sort of spot. Well, here it was, the Dwyer Pavilion. That was at the showground, and many people will know that that's where they used to house the poultry. So it was called the chicken shed, basically. Now, this was found by the GMS president, Kevin Booth, who was still, even to this day, our patron. He was very much involved in finding this new place. Now, there was one thing really going for it. It was very, very cheap. It was very cheap. It was very cheap because, first of all, it had no stage. So the stage had to be totally built by the members of the cast, the production team, and the crew. We also find that apart from the stage being built, that there was really no scenery there. And you can see by this picture here, this is taken from a South Pacific, which was at the Dwyer Pavilion. And it meant that they didn't have any wings to put your stuff off at the side. And that meant, of course, they didn't have large sets like we have today. The furnishings that they did have came from a group called Brown & Son, who'd been helping the society ever since the very first production in 1948. Now, dressing rooms were interesting. At the Dwyer Pavilion, there were none. There were none. So I asked some of the old timers that were there, where'd you change? And apparently they went out a side door, and there were some steps that went down underneath the Dwyer Pavilion. And that's where certainly the men changed. And I think there might have been a little spot there partitioned off for some of the ladies as well. There also, you'll love this, it was a refreshment place in the intermission time, between the two acts. So they had tea, coffee, as people were no doubt changing in one corner of that spot. Now, the lights at the Dwyer Pavilion were all hired. They were placed in beams that were above the roof, and they were held by rope or by chains. They also had in the back a spotlight operator that was up in a platform found in the back of that hall. Now, backdrop scenery, as you can see in this clip, was some rosemary. Now, what they used to have was they didn't have like a proper proscenium arch, so they actually built a wooden structure that they were able to put curtains on. Or in a backdrop situation, as you can see here, this canvas was painted on. And in some shows, they actually had a number of these that were peeled off. I'm not quite sure how they did that, but there was one show, Rosemary, for instance, had 4 scenes in it, and they would peel back the curtain to show you the one that they were using at the time. I think that was pretty interesting. They also had a front frame, so that was served as the front curtain. And again, somebody would pull that curtain. There'd be 2 people on either side. They would walk across and put that curtain together. So that was interesting. Now, at the Dwyer Pavilion, they did have mics. So the first time, they used some sort of microphones, but they weren't body mics that we have today. They weren't shotgun mics or directional mics. They were basically the same kind that you'd walk up and speak into. So they didn't really carry a lot of volume around the hall. Now, one of the things that I discovered talking to some of the people that performed there was noise. Noise was just incredible there. That's an example of what the Dwyer Pavilion looks like today. That photograph was taken not that long ago. You can see that it has a corrugated, tin roof. And one of the real problems there was when it rained really hard, then it would drown out the people on the stage. And I asked one of the performers, what did you do when it really pelted down? Well, we tried to sing above the rain and the orchestra. Now, that didn't work very well. Or sometimes they would do a short freeze, just do nothing like that. Or if it got so bad, like it was like a tropical thunderstorm, then they would lower the lights and an announcement was made, ladies and gentlemen, we will wait until the thunderstorm is gone before we continue. I wonder how many times that might have happened in there. It was also right on the train line. And so as the trains would whiz up and down and clang and make noise, no matter what the scene was, you could hear the trains. And I'd imagine in some of those scenes, which might have been, pretty solemn, to hear a train whistle go or a train banging into other cars or whatever would have been very off-putting for the actors there. Patrons were advised to come along with their cushions and their blankets because, you see, all the seats had to be brought in. The seats were not comfortable ones like we have today. They were actually, one of the members of the society owned a boat building shop at, I think it was Umina. And he, for some reason, had a whole lot of seats. I don't know why a boat builder would have that, but he did. And they would bring them here and have to put them in the theater, in the pavilion, because there were no seats. So you bring your cushion along and your blanket along. And in the wintertime, when it got cold in there, I'll tell you, it got cold. So what they did, they used to advertise in the middle of winter, come to the Dwyer Pavilion because it is centrally heated. And I thought, that's interesting. So again, I learned that they actually asked members of the cast to bring along their little space heaters from home, little electrical heaters, and they had all these extension cords, and they had that was their central heating. I thought that was pretty cute. Costumes were something that, again, were hired. Now, of course, as I've said before in past episodes, costumes are made by the society. We have thousands of them. But they were hired in those days. And this is one of my favorite pictures. On the, you'll see Kevin Booth is the cowboy, and he's our patron. But on the other side, I always said, is that Groucho Marx? Because those old enough to know about the Marx Brothers, that's actually Sid Gibson, but he looks like Groucho Marx. This is a photograph taken from the very first show at the Dwyer Pavilion, which was indeed Riorita. And by the way, if you went to see Riorita, it was on, I think, for 4 performances. It would set you back $3.50 in those days. We have here, that's the program cover for Riorita. This was pretty symbolic of most of the programs in those days. And it gives you the dates and so forth. Again, they only did like 3 or 4 shows in those days. And I often wonder, for a cast member, if you spend all that time learning dialogue or whatever, to only perform 3 or 4 times, well, I admire them. It's difficult. We, of course, today, our GMS shows average anywhere between 11 and could be up to 17 or 18 shows, which is great. Now, they chose Riorita because they had performed that show in 1952, and it was sold out. So they thought, okay, we're going to bring it back, and we're going to show that to our audiences who have been waiting for years now to come and see a GMS show. There was a lot of interest beforehand. Newspapers, and there were 2 papers at that time, certainly the Gosford Star, sorry. There was also a Gosford Times for a while, and I think the Express was also around. But you find a lot of comments about how much looking forward they were to having GMS back on the stage and performing for the Central Coast. The newspapers, again, would outline the characters there, they'd outline the story, and really got that enthusiasm going. Now, the show's orchestra, unfortunately, had a real disadvantage. When Riorita began, again, all the orchestrations are hired. Even to this day, they're hired. So you pay a certain percentage of your production costs go to orchestrations. Well, when they received the one from Riorita, apparently most of them were dog-eared or written all over, and they were in such bad shape that the musical director and a few of the a few of the players had to sit down and do all the compositions themselves. Boy, that is something you don't need just before you open a show. Now, as I said, Riorita had 4 sets, which is quite amazing. If you have a look here at this picture, this is from one of the shows that were there, and this one was called Rose Marie, and it was performed in 1970. Now, what I'm trying to get at is the very fact that even though this was a poultry shed at the showground, it didn't stop this society from making big musicals happen there. Now, this is an example of advertising. This was a picture was placed in the, I think it was the Gosford Star in 1970, and it shows Mounties, and that's what Rosemarie's about. It's got Mounties and Indians and all sorts of interesting characters in it. And I often wondered, when I looked at that photograph and I read about that, I wondered if that was the cast. And then I thought it probably wasn't. It was probably perhaps a pony club or something, because it's not very often you're going to get 7 or 8 or 9 cast members of that age that have horses. I don't know. But that was, I thought, a really good publicity thing. The next shot that we have here is The Sound of Music, because that's the final show that was presented at the Dwyer Pavilion. And that is, you know, you have your favorites. And I've got thousands of pictures from GMS shows from 1948 till today. And that is got to be one of my very, very favorite pictures. Of those people in that picture, all but one of them went on to do lots and lots of GMS shows. Just incredible. A couple of them, the girls on the right, and I'm looking backward here, the girls on the right became choreographers and did a lot of choreography for GMS. The 2 young boys, they're both the Booth brothers, and they have done many, many GMS shows. So I love that picture. And just finally, that's from The Sound of Music in '75. Now that backdrop there, and it looks like 3-dimensional, that backdrop is a painted drop, and then I think they slid across. They had a little sort of iron stabilizing rod up the top, and I think they must have pulled across those pillars, because it looks very effective. Some of those nuns have become very, very famous in GMS history, including Fran Kendall, who is on the right-hand side. She has directed more shows at GMS than anybody else. She's directed 20 GMS productions, and she ranks #1. Well, that was the Dwyer Pavilion. And during that time, I've got to say that a lot of still looking for other venues. The Dwyer was lovely because it meant that the community, the people involved in this, basically came together to put the stage, to build the stage, to bring in the seats, to do all that work. And remember, they did not have a place to build it in. So they sometimes would build it outside and have to move it inside, or that they tried to build it in the pavilion itself. It wasn't really conducive for a terrific working atmosphere. At the end of 1975, they were very fortunate because a new venue was now available. And the next time, I'm going to tell you about the move from the Dwyer Pavilion to the Gosford High School Hall. Stay tuned. Thank you.